Hi YouTubers and subscribers, and welcome to my pantry again. Today I wanted to do a video about those people who are very serious about getting started in canning their own foods. I'm a big advocate of canning just because we live off grid. I've said this before, electricity can be very, very valuable, and running big freezers just ain't cutting it on our off-grid homestead. You may find yourself in the same position when you decide to go off-grid, or maybe even if you're not off-grid, but you want to be more self-sustained and more self-sufficient. Well, canning really is the old-fashioned way to preserve food. Mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers have been doing it for a long, long time. And I remember watching my mom in the kitchen growing up, canning all of the spoils from her garden. And I kind of picked up on it, and I really, really enjoy it. But I know there are people who probably are just getting started, and they don't even have a clue, you know, what to do, what to buy, what is this canning all about. So this is going to be for those people, kind of a quick tutorial, and I'm going to walk you through canning, jars, what the canner does, just some helpful tips and tricks for your homestead, be it on or off the grid. All right, let's first talk about canners. Canners come in all different sizes. This is my big hefty duty commercial 41 quart canner. It's huge. I love it. But you can also get, I have two of these. This is my Presto. I believe it's a 24 quart canner. I love it. And then you have every size in between. They have some similarities when it comes to canners. All canners come with some type of rack, usually, and that has two racks in there, and my Presto has that type of rack in there. They also have steam vents, all of them do. This is a little bit different. Here's my steam vent for my Presto, and this is the vent for my All-American canner. There can be a little bit of difference between some of the canners. As you see, if I put this lid on, it locks in place by these nifty little screws. If I put this canner lid on, it kind of hooks, and then you twist, and then it locks in place. So a couple different things when it comes to the locking system. There are also two different types of gauges that come with the canners. There are also two different types of gauges with canners. There's a weighted gauge and there's a dial gauge. Now the weighted gauge is what I call the jiggler gauge. And what happens is when it jiggles, it's actually helping to maintain and correct the pressure inside the canner. The other gauge that you will see are these dial gauges, and that's what comes with my American canner. And then what you do is you get a counterweight that seals off the pressure vent, and that is how it actually maintains the pressure in the canner. And once you purchase that canner, there is some care and maintenance to it. What I suggest is every year when you pull out your canner, make sure the vent holes are clean and open, because if they're not, you're going to have a lot of problems. So make sure you check these if you have a Presto, and you want to make sure that this thing is going up and down. The other thing, and especially with these Prestos, when you flip it over, they have a gasket. This is the rubber gasket seal, and you want to make sure that that's still pliable. If it's not, you can, you know, for my care and maintenance, I rub a little bit of olive oil around this seal, and having an extra gasket on hand is always a good preventative thing to have. Also, real quickly, the inside of your canner, you can keep it clean by putting a little bit of white vinegar with your boiling water in there, and that will help clean it out. Now you can see mine's a little bit stained. That's okay, but when I can again, I'll throw that white vinegar in there, and that should help get rid of those stains. That's if you're real particular about, you know, what it looks like inside. The next purchase for newbies should be a real simple canning kit, and a canning kit will come with such things that you're gonna be able to use them. It's not going to go to waste. One of these little I don't know what they're called, but hot jams, hot jellies. You pour it and it doesn't splatter. It keeps your jars clean. And one of the other thing that I really like is the jar lifter. Yes, you're going to need a jar lifter. I was cheap to begin with, and I didn't have any of these things, and yeah, I ended up burning myself, and it just wasn't a good way to go. This is a lid lifter, so when you're boiling your lids, you can lift them out. So spend the money, go on Amazon, and buy yourself the canning kit. The next cool purchase is going to be your jars. And on your homestead, you are going to have to decide what type of jars is going to work for you. So I'm going to pan around. You can kind of see I've got a little bit of a variety of jars. Oh, look, I got some big ones, and I've got some wide mouths, and I've got some narrow mouths. They come in all shapes and sizes, but let's break it down for you. Number one is, I'll pan over here, they're going to come in a case. And when they come in a case, they're going to come with the lids and the rings already on them. So you just make that purchase and your jars are going to be ready to go. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of advice. If you are on a budget and say you have time to go to rummage sales and to Goodwill, you could hit the jackpot and find used jars. There is nothing wrong with used jars as long as they are not cracked and they're not, chipped along the edges here. You can reuse a jar over and over and over again. So once you buy your jars, you're going to have them forever. So don't be afraid of going looking at rummage sales and Goodwill. The only thing, though, is when you do get these jars at these other places, they're probably not going to have any lids on them. That's when you're going to have to make a separate purchase for some lids, and we'll go over the lids after I talk about the jars. All right. What about the jars and the sizes? Yeah, it's all different types of sizes. We've got these little ones. I think these are pints. These are good for jams and jellies. We've got really small ones. These are 4 ounces. I actually did some of my little hot peppers in here. Very good for smaller batches of specialty foods and items. Then there are the pint jars, which are very, very popular. They come in narrow mouth and they come in wide mouth. Then there are also quart jars that come in wide mouth and they come in narrow mouth. And finally, there are some unusual sizes like this 1.5 pints, which is a wide mouth. Now, what will work for you? That's going to be a personal choice. One of the tips I want to pass on is think about this. When you use the narrow mouth jars, they are very, very hard to clean. When you've got food packed in there and you're trying to get a sponge in these narrow mouth jars, it really is a difficult jar to clean. So that's number one. And number two, when you're trying to get the food out of these jars, if these jars are not filled with something like, as you see, I've got narrow mouth here, I'll put my salsa in a narrow jar because it's liquid. I'll put my my spaghetti sauces in there. They're liquid. I've used all kinds, but I stay away from the narrow mouth ones with, when it comes to my meats and when it comes to my butter and when it comes to all of my beans. The ease of use to get the foods out and cleaning, hands down, is a bestseller for me. So I do stick with the wide mouth jars. So just consider that if you're going to make a big purchase. There may be some concern with you using those narrow mouth jars. Also, if you're going to be canning a lot of jams, that's just my recommendation, but I find I like the wide mouth ones for all my jams and my jelly. I give them away as gifts, and you can really get a spoon in there and a knife in there to get the jam out a little bit easier. So the wide mouth pint jars really work well for all my jams and jelly. The other thing that might help make that decision what size jars is how many people are you going to be feeding. There's only me and my husband, so I use a lot of the pint jars as opposed to the quart jars just because there's only 2 of us. So I fill up all of these pint jars with my daily food that I know I'm going to be pulling off the shelf all the time. I mean, I'm always pulling off pinto beans, and I'm always pulling off my black beans to make a meal. And I'll crack open a pint jar, and, I'll get 2 days worth of usage. But if you've got a big family, you might want to stick with these big quart jars, because one quart jar will make that meal, as opposed to using, a pint jar. You're going to need a couple of these to feed a family of maybe 4 or 5. So that might help make that decision for you, quarts versus pint. And the next thing I want to talk about are lids. Now, I'm going to do a quick disclaimer, because people are going to freak out. I know they always do when I tell them I reuse some of my lids. Yes, I reuse some of my lids. But you got to be smart about this. If you feel uncomfortable and you think it's unsafe, don't reuse your lids, okay? But I reuse the ones that are in good condition. I always make sure to check the gasket around it. I don't know if it's a gasket but it's that rubber piece. I always make sure there are no dings or dents. And if they look like they're in really good, reusable condition, I put them in the boiling pot of water and I put them right back on my jars. I have had a 0 fail rate when it comes to reusing my lids that are in pretty good condition. Now, if they're in bad condition, throw them out. If you feel like this is unsafe, don't do it. But I do save a lot of money by reusing my lids, and I have been canning for over 20 years. So that's a pretty good success rate. The other thing is, when you buy those jars from Goodwill or from a rummage sale, they're probably not going to have lids. You're going to have to make a purchase. There are 2 different ways to make that purchase. You can buy the ones that have the rings and the lids. This is about $3.75. They come in wide and narrow mouth. Or if you've got some of these bands already, and I've got big boxes of bands, so I rarely buy the lids with the bands. I'll just buy the lids alone, and I think they're probably about $1 cheaper if you just buy the lids. The other thing is, there is another lid out there that's called a Tattler lid, I believe. They are supposed to be BPA free. They are reusable. They're kind of like a plastic, I believe. This is the thing. I don't use them. I would love to use them. I've read about them. I've heard the good feedback, but they are more expensive. This is like $3.75 in this size. The Tattler would be about $9.50. So there is a price differential. On your homestead, for your canning goods, you're just going to have to decide what route you want to go down. But just know that there are options. A couple other things that you want to keep in mind if you've made that purchase with that new canner. Excellent day. Read the book, the manual. And number 2, all canners, I don't care if it's an All-American canner or it's a Presto canner, when you're heating things up, you have to let it vent for 10 minutes. And then you put your pressure gauge on, or your jiggler, whatever, or the counterweight, but it has to be 10 minutes. The other thing that I would recommend is once you turn off the canner, let it cool down to depressurize it before opening it. Please do that. And then when you finally do take your jars out, let them sit for at least 12 hours, hopefully 24 hours undisturbed. And then you'll hear that wonderful popping noise, and then you know you've created something wonderful. So I just ran out of more tips. That's it. Go and buy yourself a canner, get yourself some jars, and get started. And when you do, shoot me back some comments. I'd really love to hear from all you people out there. In the meantime, God bless you, and have fun canning.